I always say to people, even if you're not going to write something down, say it out loud to yourself or someone else, and you'll go, yeah, does that sound like a good idea? Really? You're going to stand in that wheelie chair and put those Christmas decorations up here? You've got a grant for an electron microscope. That's fantastic. Do you know how much the power supply is going to cost? It now needs to be in a temperature monitored room, and it needs to be in a dust-free environment, and it now needs an access control. Now it needs to be a clean lab. That's all £200,000 worth of spend that you don't have, that we're now going to have to find somewhere. Actually, I think I've had far greater reach and impact doing what I've done subsequently than I ever did working that research.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey, and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello and welcome. I'm your host Sarah, and this is episode 70 of the Research Adjacent podcast. Today we turn our attention to health and safety. And if you've ever worked in a lab, the mere mention of those words might make you groan. But today's guest, Stephen Britton, is here to help us appreciate these unsung heroes. Honestly. Stephen is currently Biological Safety Officer at Durham University, but before that he spent over 20 years working for the Health and Safety Executive, the government department which sets and enforces health and safety legislation. In our conversation, Stephen paints a picture of what life would be like without the current regulations, some of the major incidents that he has been involved in investigating, and why the constant churn of university research projects can throw up particular challenges. Listen on to hear Stephen's story. Welcome along to the podcast, Stephen. It's fantastic to have you here. We know each other already in a slightly different context, so this is going to be a first to hear all about what you do for work. So tell us, what is it that you do?
Currently, I do health and safety and biological safety at Durham Uni. So way back in the 90s, I did a PhD in human genetics. And from there, I went straight to the Health and Safety Executive, who were the national regulator for health and safety in the UK. So I spent about 10 years doing general health and safety, started out doing agriculture and woodworking. We then became more general groups where I covered every type of sort of general manufacturing industry on top of that. I then moved across to the chemicals division, so I would inspect big chemical plants on Teesside and quite a few fires and explosions and that sort of stuff. And then one of my former colleagues had moved to Durham Uni and had become head of health and safety there, and he enticed me into kind of knowing my background to come and bring my knowledge of chemical and biological safety plus sort of, so I've ended up kind of 20 years later back in a university environment, but in the sort of professional services side of the university, the sort of always the slightly worse off half of it, that universities are very structured towards their academic activity, and the kind of the professional services are kind of the unsung heroes in the background, helping everything actually happen.
Yeah, definitely. That's very much the theme of this podcast, is to do something to tell the stories, I think, of those unsung heroes. So anybody who's worked in a research lab will have some vague sense of health and safety, but their sense of it is probably just, I have to fill in like risk assessments or something. Tell us a bit about what working in health and safety means.
That's always been the problem of it. And back when I worked in a lab, someone suddenly thought, we should do some safety. So we had this big folder of SDSs, literally, I would say probably 600 or 700 of them. And we had to sign to say that we'd seen all these.
What's an SDS?
The safety data sheet. Every substance that you use, they used to be called MSDSs, big called SDSs for a while now. But yeah, so, the product data sheet, if you like, of like how that affects people. And you would just sign the thing, and every now and then you'd go, we're having a safety inspection. So we would clear the lab up and we'd shut all the fire doors back up, because we had a long lab with various rooms through it, which we used to prop the fire doors open all the time in because you needed to carry stuff through.
Yeah.
And now that I work in health and safety, I know that is perfectly legitimate. If you're in control of the door and in an emergency, you would shut it behind you. Yeah. So it's like, we used to do stuff and kind of hide things from people. I ended up doing safety stuff because I I was writing up my PhD and thinking about what I wanted to do next. I'd been applying to various scientific jobs. So I'd been to AstraZeneca, I'd been for interviews, and Unilever even, who have techie people that are involved in making various things, and got reasonably close to landing some of those jobs. And then in a pub one night, someone had suggested I give health and safety a go because I'm quite good at talking to people and quite good at putting technical stuff across. And they worked as an operational inspector. And it was like, they'll take you in and they'll train you. And you didn't have to pay to retrain and whatever. So you
Mm.
go, fantastic. So I got through that selection process. And you then move into the real world. And everyone's come across a risk assessment as a thing, but everyone does it as a set of two tick boxes almost.
Yeah.
This risk is this number, and now it's that number. And that doesn't help anybody. And it's just unproductive, a lot of that, it's so boring. And what you're actually wanting people to do is think about what is it you're doing, and what is there an industry standard out there that tells you what you need to do about it? So is there already a code of practice, like putting scaffolding up, something that you'll see on every street? They're always built the same way and they always look identical. And funnily enough, there's a code of practice they have to follow. And it's that approach like kind of, so yes, you use that number system and all of that. And that's usually used to justify spending money on stuff that you go, we have this problem, we need to sort it out. And because it's such a high hazard, there's a justifiable spend behind it. You've got to get that past your finance people. But at a local level, then stuff within your control, that's always the thing I advocate is find a benchmark standard, look at that, see how that applies to what you're doing, and write down the stuff you're going to do to keep people safe. And that's as simple as it needs to be, but it's all the tedious form filling that everyone thinks that's getting in the way of what I'm trying to do until something goes wrong or someone's got a bit of ill health. And then suddenly you're looking back at all this paperwork and going, why didn't we think about that? And why didn't we do this?
Yeah.
And if only, and all of that stuff. And I've even had that people having incidents, having attended one of our sessions, having the equipment available in a nearby shed, but choosing not to use it because it's just a 2-minute job, and then they're falling out the bucket of a telehandler to their death. And you're going, you had a cage that you could have put on the fork truck 25 meters away.
Mm.
It would have taken you 2 minutes literally to go and fetch it, but you didn't bother because you thought it was just going to be straight up, do a thing,
Yeah.
fall down. And that's I guess, what I wasn't ready for joining the national regulator is you always, in terms of incidents, you go to the worst stuff that happens. So the scale of the incidents are so much more than people have in other sectors. Like not long after I joined the chemical sector, we had an aerosol warehouse that burned down. So I was months and months in investigating that. And that evening, I found myself in police headquarters advising them whether or not the plume of smoke coming out of this warehouse was likely to impinge on the A1 or the Great North train line, and whether or not they should shut the train line.
Oh, goodness
and
me.
You're thinking, wow, welcome to the chemical sector. I wasn't expecting this. And it was fireworks night. And that's where the organised fireworks display was supposed to happen. So they had to cancel all that because they were busy and half their fire engines were obviously busy.
Yeah.
And of all the days in all the world when you don't want the fire brigade to have a lot to deal with, November the 5th is definitely the one where you're like, wow.
Yeah.
So I ended up having a very long day that day.
Yeah.
And it's as a result of that, we realised that aerosol warehouses don't burn down in quite the sort of, it was always envisaged that it was like a pop type scenario that each individual aerosol
would
kind of
go,
burst and
explode,
it would just immediately go on fire. What you actually had was you could have buildups of gas at certain points and get quite large explosions. So we ended up doing quite a lot of different sort of policy stuff in the background to look at how you store large quantities of these types of materials, because obviously once they start, you can't put it out. You basically just sit back and watch it burn for 3 days.
That must be really interesting with some things, because there must be quite a lot of stuff. Technology's moving on all the time, chemicals, products, all sorts of stuff moving on all the time. And sometimes it must be like that you don't know until something happens. And then you say, oh, goodness me, we didn't think it was going to go like this.
No, exactly. And the thing about the history of health and safety is whenever someone says, oh, it's health and safety gone mad, and you go, okay, then Which set of regulations do you mean there then? You name me a set of regulations that you don't just read and think, actually, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
And if there's a big regime that's come into being, you can normally trace it back to something that happened immediately leading up to it. There you go, the Health and Safety at Work Act. Why did that happen? There was Flixborough and there was the Aberfan disaster. And they pulled the UK together into kind of, there were two huge disasters that involved quite large numbers of people. And we realized we weren't dealing with the risks of those particularly well. And that's how the Health and Safety at Work Act came into being from formerly the Factories Act, because that only applied to factories.
Right,
And there was
okay.
nothing in place for members of the public affected by stuff, which is what Aberfan was about. Obviously, there was a large pile of coal slag,
I was
which
going to say, was that
basically
the landslide
that
onto
was
the
that. Yeah,
school?
that's the
Yeah.
one that people will have seen on
Yeah.
the episodes of The Queen, that like 105 children
That's
died or
awful.
something
Really
wild like that.
awful.
So yeah, when you scale stuff up to big sizes, that's when you realize that's where all the regimes have come into place. So for example, the reason we have building regulations of how you build buildings was after the Great Fire of London. So it's, yeah, we have to have a really big disaster, and then we go,
Oh.
oh dear, that didn't
Yeah.
go well. Why don't we think about that a bit better so that we design buildings so that they don't have fire breaks and all of that stuff? And the more recently, you can pull that forward to Grenfell, where obviously large buildings with an inability to fight those fires had never really been thought about before.
Yeah.
So the reason HSE got that job is because we've been looking at chemical plants and how you bring together different agencies to monitor those kind of environments for decades. So they're the obvious agency to then go, we know how to do this sort of thing, or how to pull the expertise together, because that was the great thing about working in that environment, was there was always an expert somewhere that you could call upon to
Yeah.
go, we've come across this, we don't really know where we are with this, and put feelers out to come up with a position on it, to actually think stuff through from first principles, or commission research.
Yeah.
The aerosol warehouse stuff, I knew that we'd done things like this. They have a lab in Buxton where they can test things and do all sorts. So going back to your original kind of point, when you're trying to assess something, walking through a process and thinking about stuff as it comes up in a sequence is often
Yeah.
a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And where are the points where you need to do something?
And it's usually where there's a handover between one person and another. There's a fitter who does this bit, but there may be a fitter that does that bit, but there's something in the middle which you haven't identified that anyone has to do anything with. So that's often how things drop through the cracks. Whatever it is, there's some kind of process
Process.
flow,
Yeah.
and people are really good at the main bit, making the thing, looking after the thing. They're not really very good at deliveries. They're not very good at getting rid of the waste. I always used to start at the peripheral bits, the bits you don't really care about. They're the bits that are going to catch you out, and the horrible
Interesting.
maintenance stuff. And like the main process is usually pretty well controlled, and people have
Yeah.
thought about it because there's quality issues or whatever, and you're measuring that because that's how you make all your money. But it's actually thinking about the other bits on the back end where you will have the biggest inroads, because you suddenly find the stuff that's a bit unloved and not looked after that's going to let you down one random wet, rainy weekend, and you're going to
Yeah.
climb up a rickety ladder to try and get it to go again.
Yes. I'm going to come
Um,
cropper.
exactly that.
Oh, that's really, and it makes a lot of sense actually, because I think in terms of any job, like you say, whether it's a factory or whether it's like doing what I do, I might pay good attention to doing the podcast and so on, but I don't always pay good attention to some of the kind of admin things or the legal things or the things around the periphery that,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll get round to that at some
that's it,
point. Um,
exactly.
yeah, and in universities, for example, the thing I've had thrown at me in the couple of years I've been back in that environment is they go, we're different to industry because we're changing all the time and doing new things. And you're going, yeah, you don't know how industry works at all, do you? Because
So yeah, I was
you
going to
know,
ask you what are the big differences that you found coming into the university now and the
so
stuff you.
people have this idea that a chemical plant, for example, is this dedicated thing that just does one thing and they chug away making whatever it is. There are plants that do that, but they're becoming fewer and far between. There's a lot more like toll manufacturing where you say, I need a couple of 100 litres of this product, and they will make that for you. So they go through a management of change process to do that. They go, how do we need to configure the plant? Are there any specific safety concerns? What do we need to think about with that mix? Set the alarms, set the trigger points, all of that stuff. Universities don't have a proper management of change process. You just have some people, they apply for some grants, they win a grant, they then go, I need a room converting to do this thing. And they may or may not have consulted all the right people to know, do you know what infrastructure you need to support that piece of kit? Brilliant, you've got a grant for an electron microscope. That's fantastic. Do you know how much the power supply is going to cost? It now needs to be in a temperature monitored room, and it needs to be in a dust-free environment. And it now needs an access control. Now it needs to be a clean lab. That's all £200,000 worth of spend that you don't have, that we're now going to have to find somewhere that you could have applied for in proper grants if you'd thought about it properly. And it's because academics aren't given the right training early enough to go, well, when you're applying for a grant, this is actually a project that you're trying to build, and these are what needs to come into that project.
Do you know, it's interesting, this business of actually having conversations. So in the world I work in is the kind of communication and public engagement side of things. And I would be saying the same thing. If you'd come and spoken to me before you put the grant application in, we could have properly costed for you to have an animation or a website or a podcast or whatever else it is that you want. And it's so interesting that you're saying exactly the same thing. It's, talk to us before you start down this path.
And there's even experts within bits of the university who would know which fundings you can probably tap into. And the problem they have is they're busy teaching, they're busy doing their current work. Applying for grants is time consuming, and you get 1 in 10 of them or something.
Yeah.
And it's, if you get the grant, it's, well, and now what do we do? So it's so hit and miss as to whether or not you're going to get it. They consider it difficult then to plan strategically to put stuff together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I am working on it.
Yes.
Because having been in a different environment, you can come to it with different eyes to be able to go, we haven't got an end-to-end process here if we haven't thought about those elements. If we can get closer to that and have my colleagues in estates and facilities kind of areas more clued into when you want to cost up a job.
Yeah.
It's not, this isn't costing up a real job that's actually happening. This is just a ballpark figure in order to be able to put on the application. Yeah. So they go, oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know that was a thing kind of thing. So nobody knows stuff outside of this sphere of influence until you pull them together.
Start pulling it together. Yeah.
And it's and a lot of what you end up doing, some of it is safety related, but most of it is efficiency related. And so there's often like in a lot of environments, safety and environment and quality are often pulled together, because if you get the quality that you know you're doing good research. So getting back to the point earlier of the main activity you're trying to do, if you've put good quality processes in place to make sure you make widgets of the right quality, chances are the safety elements will fall into place because of that.
Because they have to, in order to get the quality output. Yeah.
It's repeatable and within parameters and all of that stuff. So there won't be any safety hazards built out of that, because in order to be reproducible, chances are the kit is all properly thought through.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So you've said there, you told us a little bit at the beginning about your journey into this. So you originally did a PhD and then ended up, so it's civil service, isn't it? Health and safety executive.
Yes, there is civil service department.
And was that like a training program that you went into?
Yeah, they run a 2-year program to bring you up to speed and send you on you have to do a postgraduate diploma so that you have a similar level of theoretical knowledge as folk out there. But there's specific courses on different aspects, like machinery safety and construction safety and chemical stuff and extraction and Legionnaire, and you think of a topic and I've been on a course on it.
It's a very broad training to cover all kinds of
all
eventualities.
sorts
Yeah.
of stuff. So you're a real generalist. So you're a master of nothing, but you have
Mhm.
enough savvy to know what you're looking at from the get-go. But then you have technical experts lurking in other parts of the organization. If you're not sure about something, you can take pictures and go, seen this,
Yeah.
what do you think? Or do you pass it by colleagues and so on? Because nobody knows everything from the
Mhm.
get-go. But you very quickly get very familiar with different environments. But that gets to a point of tedium that, like, you walk in somewhere, you glance around the room, and you know
You
what you're
can
going to talk
tell.
about for 2 hours. Like, you
Yeah.
just go that, that, and that. Okay, which
Yeah.
order do I want to do them in? I'll guess I'll go clockwise. Or
Yeah.
I often used to go goods. I used to follow the process, like goods
Mhm.
in to goods out used to be the
Mm.
way I would
Just walk through it. Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
be through a process, and we'll
Yeah.
talk about the stuff as it comes up
Yeah.
over and above what you can see, because that's always my problem with people doing safety inspections or that kind of thing. It's just you're just looking for the obvious,
Yeah.
and mostly trivia, like a bit of tripping hazard here or a
Yeah.
bit of whatever.
Yeah.
Actually having a proper conversation with people about what they do, then unearth stuff that you go, oh, that's interesting. Not sure that's the best way to do that.
Yeah.
And then you can get into that conversation, and again, sometimes that involves a large degree of spend, but actually the place is usually thankful for your input because you've pointed something out to them which could lead them to financial disaster down the line,
Yeah.
because almost invariably, if you have a big incident, there's a huge fine.
Yeah.
There's consequences for the institution. Their reputation's dragged through the mud.
Yeah.
Nothing good comes of it,
No.
and it's usually really easily prevented. That's always the irony of most kind of incidents. Is I always say to people, even if you're not going to write something down, say it out loud to yourself or someone else, and you'll go, yeah, does that sound like a good idea? Really? You're going to stand in that wheelie chair and put those Christmas decorations up here? That doesn't sound like the best idea. I'm going to stand on my desk. Yeah, okay. Does it look sturdy? Not really sure. Should we go and get the ladder? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Because people go,
It,
oh, what's the risk? Why are you always going on? And you go, do know that 60% of all fatal accidents are less than 2 meters off the ground, which is most of all of that sort of stuff. So it's
yeah.
like, and that was, but that's always the challenge with the stuff is there are people who are overly fussy and overly paperwork focused who drag it down to it. Oh God, why am I doing this? Which then undermines the kind of the purpose of it for
Yeah.
others. That
Yeah.
there are better ways, or everyone can be a bit jobs worthy sometimes, and there's no need. That's not its purpose. So there's often people are just told that they have to do a thing and they don't really understand the
Stand what?
rationale for it.
Yeah.
And actually, if you have that conversation of what it is you're bringing to the party, they can then understand what they're doing and know when to ask for help. Because often people aren't taking shortcuts for usually for sometimes they're in a bit of a hurry or that kind of thing. But often people are trying to save the company time and effort and bother.
Yeah.
They're genuinely trying to help, but in doing so, have put themselves at a bit of risk. And over time, your perception of risk changes. So, like, if you or I tried to use a circular saw, I'd give you a push stick and you'd keep your hands a good 30 centimeters from the blade and be very happy that you still had all your parts attached when you got a
Yeah.
bit of wood to go through it. Over time, doing that several thousand times a day, you become completely blasé to that risk.
Yeah.
And I've seen people putting their fingers either side of a saw blade, making a notch in something, and you wait and
Yeah.
then interrupt them to go, can you please stop doing that?
Yes.
And go, why are you doing that with that machine? You've got other equipment here. You could do that say completely safely
Yeah. Or
without any
something
loss
else.
of
Yeah.
time. And how have you ended up
Yeah.
just doing it like that when the slightest slip and you're going to lose fingers?
Yeah.
And they don't go back on off saw blades usually either because they,
I don't even
yeah,
really want to think
the
about it if I
expert,
was to be
the,
absolutely honest.
the expertise you pick up working in safety is unbelievable. That's like you've met enough people who've had
Yeah, it's
surgery on different
serious.
things
Yeah,
that it's
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
You know what is or isn't going to work. And yeah, it's one of those areas where I don't know, everyone thinks, oh God, safety, they're so boring and why would you want to do that? But actually saving people from themselves is and feeling like I've actually influenced that organization. I was challenged once at a very well performing chemical plant. And he'd say, what do you think you bring to a job? And I'd say, okay, so companies often don't know how they're performing because everyone lies to their manager, or you may have a bully or someone, and the truth, we can't tell you the truth because you'll all start yelling at. So then you end up getting a consultant to find out why are things not working the way we want, who come around and famously just tell everyone exactly what they already know and have been saying for years, but because it's now from a third party, you can't
Yeah.
shout at them. And that's all great. Where I think a regulator comes in is I do all that same stuff. I find out from your people exactly what they think of the systems they've got and how confident are in they're working, and I then make you fix it to a time scale that we think is reasonable, so that we get stuff done. And sometimes that's quite expensive, and the company has a bit of a twist about it. But ultimately, you walk away thinking I've added value to that process in that there's people way safer there now than there ever was before.
Yeah, so it feels like you get that job satisfaction there. Yeah.
Yeah, and investigating incidents. I remember a really good colleague when I was being trained, and he said, if you can prosecute somebody, and at the end of it they thank you for it, you know you've done it right. That you've punished them for the thing that they've done, but they've learned something from it, and you've
Yeah.
pushed them on to a different paradigm, and they all of those people will learn something from it. The difficulty is trying to embed that in the place because those individuals, that's in them now. But in an organization, you're going, yeah, everyone will learn from that one incident that time. But if you can embed that in the way people think about stuff and why they think about it, you've then made a better sort of place to work for people.
Mm. Yeah,
That's all right as an outcome.
that's pretty good. It's pretty good
Um,
to be able to say you've done that.
yeah, so I started out thinking, oh, I want to help people, I want to do stuff. So I was studying a genetic disease, and you think, I've now found how this is caused, and that might influence, oh, I don't know, 25 people around the world, maybe. But actually, I think I've had far greater reach and impact doing what I've done subsequently than I ever did working that research. That's why I want to escape that lab. I just feel like I'm sat here just pipetting stuff around. This is not for me. Like, there's so much more I could be doing.
And it does sound like what you've done has made a difference in lots of different workplaces. So I think, as I like to ask my guests, that if they had a magic wand, what would they do differently in the world that they work in? What would they change? What do you think?
So I'll stick with the health and safety stuff. What I would like as a magic wand would be that companies always act in a responsible manner rather than always push for shareholder value,
Mm.
that they actually do what they know is the right thing to do rather than get round things because they've got shareholders on their backs. If you think there's a good example of that, Boeing.
Mm.
Boeing were famously brilliant. Engineers were always in charge of their decisions. They made really good, robust equipment, and they had the greatest safety record. And then because they were falling behind Europe, the European manufacturer, they introduced a new variant of a plane that they knew was unstable. And rather than put a safety system in to solve the problem that had two instruments and the computer taking both instruments, right readings, and then taking action based on the pair of them, which is
Yeah.
really quite easy to engineer and what the engineers wanted to happen. They didn't want to do that because they'd have to tell the regulator they'd done a thing. And then so they took the shortcut, which was just to have the computer randomly pick one of the instruments and just believe what it said. And if it failed, it then tipped those aircraft into the sea. So that's the 737 MAX sort of
Yeah.
stuff that happened. And it just boils down to you're just chasing corporate greed and
Yeah.
letting the managers do things which the engineers were desperate not to do.
Yeah.
So it's that above everything that you go, being able to go, no, we're going to do the right thing by our people,
Yeah.
not just the shareholders,
Yeah. It
in
feels
order
like
to get
very
stuff.
similar to what's going on with the water companies at the moment as well, and sewage and everything.
Oh,
It's
what do you call them? Macquarie have farmed what, £1 billion out of Thames Water,
yeah.
and then left that organisation, and then their infrastructure has been rotting around
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
I
really shocking.
That feels to me like poor regulation, and that's
Yeah.
always what I always read into whenever there's a political discussion about we need to get rid of all this red tape. That is always code for we'd like to start like ruining somebody's lives because we want to make more money by taking shortcuts. And that's never the right thing to me. Anyone that talks about deregulating something, you always want to prick your ears up to exactly what it is they're talking about.
Yeah.
It's the bad press that safety stuff gets when
Yeah.
actually, do you want people to go to work and not come home in the same state they were when they
Yeah.
started?
Yeah.
Or do we want to look after people? Because if we've broken that person, then we're going to have to look after them.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. Wouldn't it be
that's
better just
more
to stop
time
it
and effort and
happening?
money and everything else. But that company doesn't necessarily have to fund the costs of all that. And that's when you go, that's not right. I would say the take home thing I would want folk to take from this is, yeah, sometimes the forms are tedious. And you can always work with the person that came up with the forms to go, can we make this a bit better? Or can we make it electronic? Or can we do something and make sure we share stuff around each other so that I'm not rewriting the same flipping thing that everyone else is doing, but actually getting to the meat of that to go, what do I need to do this safely? And thinking about the process as you go
Yeah.
along is invaluable. And the chances are, if you've done that, you'll get a better outcome anyway, because you'll have planned it properly
Yeah.
and you'll get a better experiment. You'll get a better result for whatever it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think that's all any of us want, isn't it? Do a good job, come home safe and in one piece. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing all of those insights in your career story. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, do you hang out on social media at all?
to a limited extent, I have to say. It's not a place I live. I am on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If and yeah, when you were talking about the evangelism part of it, I do believe some of that is very good and useful. And yes, I do talks and bits. If folk wanted me to do presentations on
Yeah.
things, I've done many of them over the years.
Excellent. Oh, people can track you down there. I'll get a link and pop that in the show notes. Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming along and telling us all about what it's like to work in health and safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.